Hey all, and welcome to my vlog. My name is Erin, and this is World Building Politics Part 2. Today we're covering law enforcement, military, war, and crime. We've talked before about what your characters might be fighting for or fighting against. This is where you figure out the consequences of those choices. I will link my previous videos that talk about a little bit of this in the description below. Number 1, law enforcement. What are the types of enforcement? You're going to have traditional police, border guards, city watches, rangers, highway and trade route patrols, prefects, magistrates, peacekeepers, military police, and probably a few others, but you know, Google exists and you can look into those further if those aren't enough. You want to know who is enforcing your laws, what level of authority do they have, and what happens to your characters if they're caught breaking those laws. What you choose will probably depend on what you need them to do and what kind of story that you're writing. Be practical with your choices. If your characters are traveling, they're most likely to run into border patrols or those traveling along trade routes. If your story is centered around a particular city, then they're most likely to encounter the city watch or be dealing with a local magistrate. Number 2, crime. If your characters are apprehended for whatever reason, you're going to want to know what's going to happen to them. How are your characters going to react if they encounter a law enforcement official? Does your world have due process? If your characters are going to have to go to trial, are they going to be detained until then, or are they going to be free? What are the prisons like, and what types of rights do your characters have if they're incarcerated? If you have your characters breaking laws, you're going to want to know what the punishment is going to be for them. If they get caught, is it a slap on the wrist, a fine, jail time, execution? Does that change based on who the character is and what groups they're a part of? If your characters are incarcerated and later freed, what impact does that have on the rest of their lives? Is there going to be a stigma that they need to contend with? Do they have any of their rights restricted afterwards? So many criminal justice systems today and throughout history have utterly fucked people over. If you're going to feature one in your story, you're going to want to know how corrupt it's going to be and what kind of impact this is going to have on your characters. Do any of your characters already have a criminal history, and if so, what is the circumstances surrounding it? Number 3, military. A standing army is composed of soldiers that are professionally trained. It is their job to be a soldier. It was pretty common through history for leaders to start getting pretty nervous if their subordinates developed standing armies, and there were laws put in place to prevent that. Think of how unstable things could get really quickly if one rung down from the top had standing armies and decided that they didn't like their leader anymore. A standing army is very expensive because you have to be paying, feeding, housing, and training all of those soldiers. Plus, you have to pay all of the people that are involved in taking care of them. It is also not easy or cheap to be moving mass quantities of these soldiers in addition to all of the supplies that they would need to fight and survive. An army reserve is composed of soldiers who are only active during times of war or other disasters. The reserves allow you to have a much larger number to fight as needed, but it also allows you to reduce the costs because there are way less than associated with a standing army. A militia is an army of non-professional soldiers composed of civilians that supplement the army as needed. In cases of war, which often happen in fantasy stories, militias tended to be conscripted for defense. If your character's hometown is under threat, they could raise a militia to protect it. So far as I've been able to tell, a militia does not need a specific authority in order to organize it, and it can be raised just by civilians organizing themselves. You might have expeditionary forces, which are the ones that are being deployed to other regions, and you might have fencible forces, which are the ones that are staying behind to defend the home nation. If one of the countries in your world is a colonialist butt munch, then you'll probably be working with expeditionary forces. If one of your fantasy countries is being invaded, then you'll probably have a pretty substantial fencible force to work with. In addition to military forces, you could also have paramilitary forces, which are kind of partway between military and police. I'm not 100% sure on the intricacies of all of these, but I wanted to mention them in case any of them seem like they'd be useful, and you can do more research as needed. The divisions of the military itself are going to depend on your technology levels and what sort of feel you're going for. The 3 main branches are Army, Air Force, and Navy. Obviously, if you're not going to give your world any kind of advanced technology, they're probably not going to have an Air Force. If you're in a landlocked region, they're probably not going to have a Navy. Army is likely the most common that you're going to be working with in your story. There are tons of additional branches that you could potentially work with, including medical, cyber forces, special forces, Coast Guard, National Guard, etc. It'll all depend on your world and what's going to be relevant to your story. Are any of your characters part of the military in any capacity? Are they part of it willingly? Remember that militaries tend to have pretty rigid structures, so the chances of your 16-year-old character being promoted to a general is super duper slim, if not impossible. People can still be useful to the cause without being in a top tier position. Number 4, war. War is essentially a fantasy staple at this point, and it comes up a lot. If you want to seriously shake things up, destroy current power structures, collapse empires, throw huge obstacles in your character's way, then a war is a great place to start. Who are the instigators? What is the purpose of the war? What is the state of your world before it begins, and what is the state of your world after it's over? Which groups are most affected? Some conflicts can be ongoing for decades. If you're tossing a war into your story, is it an open-ended conflict, or is it something that can be properly resolved within the context of your story? How a war affects your characters will depend on them as individuals. Their proximity to the military, their social status, health, wealth, sex, profession, etc. will all affect how they are going to be impacted by this conflict. Large-scale conflicts are a massive catalyst for change, so if you want to include one in your story, think carefully about what you want it to accomplish and how you can make it do that. Number 5, weapons. The weapons that you have available are going to depend wildly on the technology levels that you've set up and whether or not you're going to have magic involved. For the purposes of this video, I am not going to touch on magical weaponry right now. The options for weaponry are very extensive, and I am not going to go through all of the options here. You can look up the options and see what works best for you, and just be mindful of the situations that they're going to be used in. If you have hard, flat terrain, you're going to be able to cart cannons around, but if you're in a boggy area, that's not going to work so well. If you've got a mobile army, you're going to need weaponry that's easy to carry. Take a look at long range versus close combat weaponry. Once you know the exact situations that your characters are going to be in, you can select your weapons accordingly. Know what weapons your characters favor and how well they know them. Number 6, tactics. The types of warfare are vast. You have guerrilla, chemical, economical, psychological, biological, siege, etc. What you choose is going to be up to you, but be sure to do research so you understand how that particular type of warfare works. Tactics can turn the tides in war. If you have a brilliant commander, then you may still be at an advantage even if the numbers say the opposite. Also be aware that sometimes wars are decided by factors that have nothing to do with the military. Famines, natural disasters, etc. can have way more effect than people can. So if you need to weaken a side, that's a good way to do it. Things like siege warfare were often won because the besieged populations typically fell victim to starvation and disease, not because the other side was a whole bunch of great soldiers. There is honestly so much that you can work with here that I can't even begin to list it all. So instead, I will mention some of the more common ones that I've come across in history books and documentaries. Scorched earth policies. This is where everything of use is destroyed. Food, water sources, transportation, shelter, etc. are removed so that the enemy army does not have those resources available and is much more likely to die due to starvation, disease, and exposure. Attrition is systematically wearing down the other side regardless of the losses. If you've studied World War I, you have seen attrition at work on the Western Front. Blockades are almost like an extended siege. It's going to cut off resources, trade routes, and prevent people from getting in or out. Guerrilla warfare is typically a hit-and-run type of style. Smaller forces stage ambushes, sabotage, and raids to weaken the other side. Because the forces are smaller, they can move more easily, take advantage of the terrain and resources in ways that larger militaries are not able to do. Number 7, social attitudes and characters. If you've got a war going on in your story, how do each of your characters feel about it? How does it affect their participation in the conflict? How does society at large feel about it? How are your characters personally affected by the conflict? Conflicts are messy and traumatizing and destructive regardless of the intentions behind them. These are not situations that you can put your characters into and let them walk away completely unscathed. Some characters might break, others may revel in the bloodshed, and others may go out of their way to help. Whatever the outcome is for your characters from the conflicts that you're throwing their way, make it mean something. Whether it means something only to them or also to something to the wider world around them isn't as important as long as it means something to someone. So that's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. If you'd like to be notified as soon as I upload, then ring that bell. All my social media links will be in the description below. Both of my books, Olympian Confessions, Hades and Persephone, and Olympian Confessions, Hera, are available now in ebook and paperback. If you'd like your manuscript critiqued by me, you can check out my critique service on my website. If you enjoyed my videos and learned something from them, consider being part of my Patreon family, and I will see you all next week with another video. Bye!